Let me introduce Josh Shelton and David Dow, El Dorado.
Thank you to Workspace for sponsoring, and wanted also to thank AIA East Tennessee for having us. This is always homecoming for me. I grew up in Knoxville, grew up in South Knoxville, so it's an incredible place to come back home to with everything going on. So as Paul mentioned, I'll be ducking out a little early. I'll be handing it off to a very untrustworthy character, but we're gonna dive right in and get going. There's a lot of material to cover, so I'll be moving a bit quick. Leave David time for some Q&A at the end. So it's a cardinal rule as sort of small professional practice to never bring politics into the services that you provide. You might risk alienating a client. At El Dorado, we think those days might be over. I can safely say, yep. So thank you. Can safely say this is the most polarized our cultural and political landscape has been in my lifetime. And there needs to be a conversation. And short of a conversation, maybe we all need to pray. I can't say I'm very religious, but I did grow up within kind of the stronghold of Catholic and Presbyterians. And on my very southern grandmother's dining room wall, there was the Serenity Prayer that I stared at whenever we'd visit. And somehow this has kind of worked its way into my subconscious, and it's the balance of accepting the things we cannot change and the courage to change the things we can and the wisdom to know the difference. I think in this day and age, I'm resorting to this prayer quite often, and maybe we all are in our own voices from our own perspectives. And I would say that built into this prayer is a careful balance of these, the courage and the serenity, the courage and the wisdom. But I would challenge all of us to lean into the courage these days, the courage to change the things we can, and this is what this lecture is about. It's needed now more than ever. We often think of the kind of humanitarian crises, the refugee crisis is happening somewhere else overseas in lands far away. It's happening right now in our backyard. There's families separated from their kids on the border. There's the question of how you respond to this sort of thing as in the art and design community. There's a conceptual artist by the name of Christophe Buchel, who's a Swiss artist, who proposed that the border wall mock-ups become a national monument, which actually quite clever. But we also are kind of running out of patience and time for these kinds of one-liners. The other question has to do with the idea of monument itself. So whether it's the kind of contemporary art monument to contemporary art by Donald Judd at this point, he'd roll over in his grave if he thought of his installation of Marfa as a monument. But I kind of think of it that way, all the way to Stonehenge. What purpose does a monument play in our contemporary conundrum? I don't know how valuable that is for us right now. We've been looking to other kinds of work and other ways of working. This is an art collective called Post Commodity. It focuses on contemporary art's response to indigenous communities and the struggles that they face quite often. This is an installation called Repellent Fence. It was a temporary installation that was installed to suture the border between the United States and Mexico. It was only present for 4 hours one afternoon. It's just a series of helium balloons that were elevated for those 4 hours. The work itself might be seen as this, but really I think Post Commodity saw the work as the act of negotiation to allow this work to even exist in the first place, even in a temporary manner. Some negotiations with two federal governments, border security, local municipalities, ranchers, indigenous communities, all with different agendas, all with very strong opinions, many of them in opposition to one another. So Post Commodity's work in this case was initiating the conversations and the act of negotiation to allow the artwork to exist in the first place. And the question we start to ask ourselves is, where is the work of art? Is it in the act of negotiation? Is it in the act of starting the conversation? Or is it the piece itself? And it's really all the above. there's something sort of delightful and obviously lighter than air about the solution. We'll stay in the world of helium balloons for a second. This is Hashem Sarkis, who's a Lebanese architect, and this is a piece he did in Beirut. Hashem is now the dean at MIT School of Architecture. This project was always very profound to us. This project it poses the question of who has access to design, who has access to the city. The balloons were used in Beirut during a big boom to raise people up to see what their view from their high-rise condo would look like from 30 stories up. So it was a way of elevating the elite even higher to sort of see the commanding view that they would experience in the city. Hashem proposed to level the playing field of this phenomenon and proposed a balloon launching park in the center of Beirut where the public had access to have free rides in balloons every day. So what was once sort of seen as this kind of elite phenomenon, Hashem upended that, turned it on its ear, and suddenly this became a civic event. Tomas Ceresano is thinking about the environmental conundrum we find ourselves in, the retreat from scientific research and the denial of climate change. He's hitting this head-on through art installations that explore the combination of art and scientific research. These are vessels that are lifted by the sun and guided by the wind. And his big dream in these pieces is to move us towards flight, transportation that don't rely on fossil fuels. A project we've been involved in recently, we brought on a curator. It was a big risk. We brought on a curator as a partner at our firm. We've been working on large-scale, ambitious artworks across the United States since. We sort of adopted this project, but this is an elite, rich family that purchased Luis Barragan's archives and privatized them. And artist Jill Magid, in response to that, gained the remains of Luis Barragan from the family and transformed his remains into a beautiful diamond ring and has proposed to switch the diamond ring, exchange the diamond ring for the archives, thus making the archives public again, publicly accessible to Mexico. So these questions about access and public-private and who has the right to these kinds of cultural assets are also sort of floating around in our minds these days. If you haven't read about this project, it's a brain bender, and it's an amazing kind of transformative way of thinking about art. So again, is the work the diamond ring, or is it the proposed exchange? It's both. You can read about it in the New Yorker, and it's also a documentary that's coming online. It's in many film festivals. It's called The Proposal. So at El Dorado, we've been trying to reimagine our practice as more equipped to kind of think this way and work with people that are thinking this way. We've been thinking about the permanence of architecture, but as a counterpoint, we've been thinking about the kinds of conversations that architecture is capable of creating that are transformative, that allow us to start to bridge the polarization that we experience in our American landscape. So no longer are we just an architectural practice. We're all of these things, and these things lead to the kinds of imaginings that perhaps the farmer's buckshot is just as important as the astronaut's moonshot. Perhaps El Dorado is a city of gold. We're also a gas guzzler. Hell yes is equally important as ain't, and maybe it's everywhere, maybe it's anywhere. We're still trying to figure that out. So I wanted to share. We don't know if this will work or not with the sound system. We're going to try. We might have to hold the microphone up to the... No, go ahead and hit play. Hit play and then do it. I can do it. And then hit the green dot.
I don't want Josh to break my computer.
Where's the sound? No, it may not work because we've got... It's going to be channeled through this.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we won't do that today.
It's really good.
Yep. Yeah, I will say that we were nominated this year for the National Design Award through the Cooper Hewitt Museum, and we had to submit a video. So we put some thought into that, and it sort of framed this lecture quite nicely. But the video fundamentally introduces an idea of benevolent trespassing, and that El Dorado, that we're sort of encouraging ourselves and others to begin to trespass, whether it's across borders or perceived divides, whether it's crossing over disciplines to tackle kind of really thorny problems that we face in America today, whether it's the willingness to work in multiple contexts, not just urban but also rural. What kind of conversations can we create between our urban communities and our rural communities that are so polarized today? And also, how do we span from one economy to the next? How do we think about housing and affordable housing? Built into all of these ideas about crossing over or trespassing, there's very, very, very overwhelming questions that we're trying to ask that deal all the way from precious resources and climate change to bridging segregation within our cities. So we're just going to get into this work, and this is kind of a whole part of our practice that really is interested in social impact and the ways that we can begin to advance those sorts of agendas. So a lot of projects. Within each one of these chapters, we're going to talk about a few projects as an extension of that idea. So we'll start with crossing divides, and really this is really sparked by paying attention to post-commodities installation at the border. It really made us start to think about the divides that we have in our own cities, and for us it's Kansas City. We'll get into that a bit. First, I wanted to tell you that our practice has never really allowed us to sit up on a pedestal and sort of dream up issues to tackle. It's always come from within. There's always been sort of an organic evolution to the way we've thought about architecture and fabrication and art at first, but then how it's evolved into urban planning and urban design and some of these larger issues. We started as part design shop, part fabrication shop. So from the beginning, there was sort of an intention to craft and making and details. It sort of became a poetic language that fueled our practice and really established a vocabulary to work from. Very small scale at first. We were experimenting with furniture systems, kind of solving very, very detailed questions about how off-the-shelf systems combined with custom fabrication. And we started to become very interested in how we could participate in the parts of architecture that you actually touch, but then also to think about that systematically so that these systems could become scalable, and to develop a rigorous means and methods to achieve this, from shop drawings that were produced in-house, kind of simple low-tech tools that we've used all along. We've gotten really focused and good at steel. Whole mock-up process where we're asking critical questions about what weld joints to grind, which ones to leave exposed, how to solve and resolve a kind of metal bar to round pipe kind of connection. And then there's the moment where all of this kind of attention to craft shows up in one of our architectural projects and sort of steals the show. These were favorite moments of ours. Other favorite moments included when our shop absurdly kind of started to spill out into the city as ways of participating in festivals and events. This is an annual Mardi Gras festival that happened just blocks from our office. This was an installation called Badass, which was it was a bacon distribution device and a Salzer spinner. That's Steve there, Steve Salzer on the far right. What's important to know is we weren't able to spin Steve successfully, but we did distribute 75 pounds of grade C bacon that night. But this always led to kind of non-OSHA compliant fabrication techniques in the alley. There were collaborations with artists. That's James Woodfill in the center there, a Kansas City-based artist. And it would result in kind of a mixed level of success in these kind of float constructions. That's actually our welding table that's wrapped in saran wrap, and the idea that year was to distribute Krispy Kreme donuts to the crowd, but it was a thunder snow and the donuts froze. That was very unsuccessful. One of the important aspects, though, about this is this is really how we began to think about the city, and it was through these types of participation that we started to develop sensibilities around urban design and urban planning. But also the people we were working with were thoughtful. So the artists that hosted the Mardi Gras parade actually very intentionally took us east to the 18th and Vine district, where Charlie Parker started his career, and it's to this day it's still an African American community, but shamefully, Kansas City, like many cities, has our racial divide, and it's Troost Avenue. So, with great intention, David Ford insisted that we cross our racial divide during this time of collective celebration, and in a way, we all became aware together of the injustices of our city. I was teaching, so here we are, our welding table is going to the Mutual Musicians Foundation on the east side. So these were really strong connections that we were beginning to make at a grassroots level. And at the same time, I was teaching an urban design studio at the University of Kansas, and I started thinking a lot more about Troost, and so David and I taught this class together. The graphic on the left is particularly interesting in that the gray is non-Caucasian and the green is kind of more Caucasian. So you can see how strict the divide actually is along Troost. We really got our students thinking about the place at an experiential level. So Troost at that time was not necessarily where you'd be walking up and down the street as a white person, especially with a whole class of students. These students were from the suburbs, but we did that anyway, and we started having conversations, and it grounded Troost in a very human element. So just having conversations, getting people that were residing along Troost, their perspective, and all of a sudden the way that architectural drawings in the studio were starting to change. Rodney Knott at the bottom right, it was a KU basketball player, former KU basketball player, but also at this point a community leader, neighborhood leader in the Troost neighborhood. He was helping the students understand the place, and he had a very narrative quality about the way he would talk about the place. So the drawings themselves started to have more of a narrative presence. The studio resulted in this amazing overlap with the Art Institute, where we brought in graphic designers, we brought in people that were thinking about branding, so anything from a local newspaper to the right, branding for the Troost Festival, and a 30-foot-long model with many proposed infill projects. This was the result of the studio. While all of this was going on, David had been working for years on a bridge along Troost Avenue that crosses Brush Creek, which is on the southern side of Troost, but still a very, very strong racial divide, even to the southern part of the city. And this was the solution of Troost Bridge. So while the studio sort of resulted in this kind of rambling run-on sentence of a presentation, Troost Bridge really distilled poetically a kind of a social condition, and it was with a lot of intention that the solution read as a kind of piece of infrastructure with no boundary and no borders. So glass was chosen as a poetic material in this case to communicate that lack of barrier. This is the opening of Troost Bridge. Our shop gets involved in these, so even though we're starting to work in kind of the world of infrastructure and planning, our shop is integrally involved. These are mock-ups, glass panel mock-ups. And it's a very quiet and kind of reflective installation. We were working with an artist named Derek Porter who was thinking a lot about light and reflection. many ways, this was a perfect segue to a project that we took on outside of our own city. This is a project in North Omaha. Anyone who's familiar with Omaha knows that it's the same condition of Kansas City. It's got a very strong racial divide. It's a very segregated city. And many cities in the Midwest many cities in the South are. So this is a very common, ubiquitous problem. This is a next-generation community center called the Accelerator at Highlander. So again, this project started with student involvement. So the fact that we spoke at the University of Tennessee last night, student work is very meaningful. And I hope as a local community you all know that and are creative about how you involve students and the university in your project. But this one took a circuitous route through Chicago. Maybe some of you all know the artist Theaster Gates. He's a very prominent global artist at this point. He was kind of emerging and quickly accelerating when we worked with him. But his MO is that he was renovating buildings in the south side of Chicago, his own neighborhood, into community assets and cultural resources. But he was using the materials that he'd gutted from the house to create works of high art. So these shoe shine stands that he was making are represented by White Cube in London. These were selling for an absurd amount of money. And the more he was getting for his art, the more he would laugh about how much he was subverting the art system and using the money to reinvest in the south side of Chicago. So it became this sort of closed economy, this closed loop economy. It was brilliant. So again, the questions we were asking before is the shoe shine stand the work of art? Is the renovated house here with the gutted materials the work of art, or is it the book collection inside as a community resource for the Southside residents? That's our architecture students enjoying some books, some architectural books that are part of the collection. He was also getting involved at that time in a collaboration with the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts at the Carver Bank. And the Carver Bank is in North Omaha and was one of the first African-American owned and run banks in the country. So Theaster purchased it for next to nothing as an abandoned building, and through a collaboration with the Art Center, established artist in residency program at Carver, and installed a snack shop for Big Mama, who owns a soul food restaurant. That's Big Mama to the right. And Big Mama's soul food restaurant was kind of a bit tired and not as kind of still a destination in Omaha, but she was trying to diversify her business plan. So this is our students visiting Big Mama's soul food restaurant in North Omaha at the time, and there you see Big Mama and her daughter Gladys as part of the Accelerator project that I shared a moment ago during construction. We were able to also provide a new home for her in that project. So this kind of organic outreach that we did, we were actually building relationships with future tenants of a project that we didn't know existed. This is the projects presenting the work. At the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts, we were inviting local stakeholders, and through this we met a gentleman by the name of Othello Meadows, who's a director and organizer for 75 North, which is an incredible nonprofit, and they had just acquired 30 acres of property in North Omaha to do a purpose-built community and a community center. So we started talking to Othello about this, and we started to dig a bit deeper at this point. And once again, you kind of notice the green in this case is African American, and other colors represent white, Asian. And you'll notice that in North Omaha, the density of green is pretty intense, and it's not that in the rest of the city. Other diagrams we were looking at had to do with the high concentration of contaminated sites, of subsidized housing, and of course we looked at the effect of plowing, an interstate right through a small neighborhood. And so you can see to the left the fine grain of the community fabric, and then in the middle, once the interstate plowed through, how it really cleared that out. And in our pink box there on the right is our site, and we're trying to reestablish that kind of neighborhood pattern. So this is the site plan. There's a master plan we participated in with multiple firms. Our site is to the top left. And It was one of those dream programs where you're assigned these kinds of programs in architecture school, and you roll your eyes, then you think your professor's pie in the sky, that these kinds of things don't really happen. But it was 2 university outposts. It was business incubators. It was a home to the founding nonprofit organization, a coffee roaster, a coffee shop, a food hall with Big Mama's Soul Food, an event hall, and then an urban aquaponics center. Like, really? So we just knew that we just couldn't screw it up. But it was at this moment where I thought, this has to be our best play. I mean, this is the moment where design excellence has to show strong. And we set forth to design a building that was both inspired by and would also inspire the community that uses it. So the floor plan just shows that to the bottom left of the site plan is kind of the upper ground level, and then there's parking to the lower, and the building acts as sort of a large retaining wall, but it separates programmatic uses quite nicely. We use perforated screen in west-facing and south-facing facades to help mitigate solar gain. You can see the greenhouse to the rear of this shot, the event space is to the front, and the sort of symbiotic relationships of these unexpected program mashups were the beauty of the project. I'm sorry. So there's the coffee shop, the roaster's right behind. And as we were photographing the project, we were sort of excited about these kind of beautiful shots of the architecture. 75 North was photographing the project as well. Their money shots were the community itself, and so there's a whole collection of photographs of people using the building in the grounds and outdoor programming and events. It's super, super sweet. So next chapter. That last chapter really dealt with if we think about the border as a big crisis, don't let that be abstract. We have borders in our own cities we have to tend to, and we have to think about creatively. So this chapter has a lot to do with trespassing into the workspace of others. We do a lot of work with an art practice called Saint Fasson, which is they're based in Calgary now, but it's a British artist and a French architect who were previously based in Scotland. They relocated to Calgary because they got a dream commission to basically work with the city of Calgary to make their water infrastructure emotionally visible to their citizens. So the city of Calgary has some of the cleanest water in the world, and it's a source of pride, but it's all buried in pipes below the ground. So the city wanted to set forth initiatives that would make people aware of this natural resource. So one of the first ideas they had was to use fire hydrants as a water source for events in the city. But rather than autopilot solutions like this, they actually engaged the maintenance department and the maintenance department's shop, and the technicians became art collaborators. This is a core way of working that Saint Fasson brings to the table. So these are highly crafted and well thought out solutions to tapping into fire hydrants. But what Saint Fasson did is a bit of social engineering, where each cluster of drinking fountains became kind of a social exchange. So again, it's not just tapping into the water and revealing that it's drinkable right out of a hydrant. How amazing! But it's also how do you create conversations around this phenomenon? Another project they did that was quite nice was, again, revealing the invisible of infrastructure is a big theme of this, and it's a big theme of the work we do. How do you sort of reveal what's not seen? So these were studies of kind of the microorganisms that exist within water. Which ones are desired in water? Which ones you have to treat for? And Saint Fasson brought in glass blowers to work around this idea, and they became these incredible pieces of blown and spun glass that represent and make visible these organisms. And this was on exhibition in Calgary in multiple places. So as well as working at that level, they also have this incredible ability to scale up what they're thinking. And this is a watershed park in Calgary where they were brought on to be a contributing artist to the project. But rather than propose some sort of sculptural piece that would be at the center of the park, they just pushed everyone out of the way and said, we're just going to lead this project. So we'll design it, and everyone works for us. Calgary said, great, we love that. So this was Samphasun's solution to sort of a water filtration process in their watershed as it comes down to the Bow River. And we were brought on to think about the next phase of this public art initiative to expand into other departments, including waste and recycling, climate change, kind of a department of kind of future thinking. And this is a trip to the Bow Glacier, which is the source of a lot of water in North America. It's retreating, actually, but it's one of the first things we did. And Samphasun put us through the same ringer that they put themselves through, where they had embedded themselves into the inner workings of the engineers. We also did that for like 14 hours a day, a week straight, where we visited with researchers and engineers. And the plan is in process, but basically the proposal is that artists actually come to Calgary and serve residencies working with engineers within these various departments before they propose a work of art. So the work of art is actually embedded in the thinking of the utilities and the agendas that the utilities face. There'll be a theme here about water as a precious resource throughout this. So this is Michael Jones Mckean, an artist that started in Lawrence, Kansas by basically making small rainbows in his backyard and photographing them. Hesse McGraw, who's now our partner and curator, is fascinated with this and asked Michael if this idea could scale up. At the time, Hesse was chief curator at the Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts, and this is the response that Hesse got from Michael, like, it's just a rainbow over a building. Anything is possible. This led to some experimentation where maybe this could happen. Here's some jets of water at the top of Bemis Center for Contemporary Arts. It was very important to the artist that this be recycled water. So this is water that's recycled from the roof. The building becomes a machine for water recycling infrastructure. Galleries are taken over by this infrastructure, so installations that happened in these spaces had to work around this infrastructure. A lot of people think art is kind of the wave of a magic wand, or there's something kind of like some other genius kind of factor, but actually these installations take a lot of technical rigor, so architects are very well equipped to participate in these kinds of problem solving. And here's the rainbow, not just over the building, but spanning the city. Character front and center is one of my favorite characters in all of our photo archives. There's a sense of wonderment about this project that is so disarming, and I can't help to think that in these polarized times that we're living in today, reconnecting to one another just as human beings that marvel at one of the most ancient spectacles on earth, it's important, right? It's important to find time to do this. So California has a huge water crisis. I mean, we maybe all know that. The governor actually is acknowledging here that there is technology available to address this problem. It's water recycling. It's black water recycling. So it's recycling our own waste into drinkable water and potable water. And the biggest challenge actually embedded in this quote is that we have the means to solve this, but it's public perception is the biggest problem. So the governor was excited about the rainbow. So the idea of drinking a rainbow was a lot more attractive than drinking your own waste. So imagine that. So the idea is to treat black water and create the rainbow with treated black water, and then invite people to come down and try it out. But the bigger vision was to take Fort Mason, California, completely off the grid. So this is now in process. Rainbows also are not magic. There's a lot of technical rigor that goes into optimizing kind of where and how the rainbow exists in the public realm.
Don't tell your kids.
Yeah, they are magic. It's like Santa Claus. But so these are all calculations and algorithms about weather patterns and historic data. and angles of focal reference. And then, there's basically using Grasshopper and computational design to actually design the system that creates the right rainbow for the right place. We should patent this. We are now rainbow engineers.
Architects.
Don't mess with us.
Rainbow architects.
Don't mess with us. So optimizing this, these are renderings, but kind of moving forward beyond schematic design with this installation. And finally, I just wanted to touch on a pilot project we're working on with the Las Virgenes Water District. This is a pilot project they were taking a different approach. It's the same black water treatment called pure water. They're going to scale up with this infrastructure to serve all of Las Virgenes with treated black water. They're thinking about the same thing. How do we bring people on board? Their approach was to make the technology itself transparent and invite people to come learn about it through a pilot project. And we thought there was a bigger conversation to have and in terms of understanding where the crisis is coming from to begin with and help people understand the urgency. So we started doing our own research into California's water problem. It's the most hydraulically altered landmass on the planet. You can see where Las Virgenes is, and it's downstream of 1,800 miles of aqueduct and canal infrastructure. I mean, just think about that for a second. It's been recycled. The water, by the time it gets to Las Virgenes, has already been recycled like 17 times. So, at what point are you kind of drinking leftover water? It's a big question. And then this is the most horrifying, like almost 60% of the water is lost to evaporation. So, this is a nondescript building, and in some ways a simple architectural process and solution really had to do with making the equipment transparent and understandable. But a lot of the research that we did, we proposed as graphics on the wall to sort of frame the issue in a much larger context. You can see we also introduced a hipster water bar, which was kind of fun, and then kind of thinking a little bit about branding, like could you take the water home? And we started talking with them a lot more. Like Calabasas is in part of this water district, so it's got the highest concentration of celebrities in the world per capita in Calabasas, and so we were sitting there thinking, well, if you're drinking black water. Might be cool to drink, wastewater from a celebrity than one of us, right? So we had a whole jingle, like, a little bit of Kim Kardashian is in Calabasas, Drake. So a little bit of Drake, a little bit of Kim, would that be cool? It was not accepted as a viable proposal, but it's my favorite part of the project. I'm going to hand it over to David and let him run with it for a while. And thank you very much. I won't be around for Q&A, but I really do appreciate it. It's great to be home.
Time check. How are we doing? 15 minutes? Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about architecture eventually, but not quite yet. This is the Flag Exchange. This is a project curated by Hesse, our partner. We know Mel Ziegler quite well. He's the head of the sculpture department at Vanderbilt. We've known Mel for a long time. The Flag Exchange is a really simple, just sort of going back to the beginning of the talk. It's an act of generosity. It's also an act of social criticism. Essentially, the project is Mel went to every state in the country and identified a public institution, a library, an Army recruiting station, a post office, and identified them because they were flying ragged flags, which is against the law. And he generously exchanged their ragged flag with a new flag, with the condition that he be able to display the flag in certain venues. This is at the San Francisco Art Institute, where Hesse was head of special shows, special events. This is the one of the live debates between Trump and Hillary Clinton. This is in the Federal Hall, which was the first federal building in the country in New York. It's a national park site. And it's complicated, but it's also very beautiful in the space that it's in. As Josh said, we work quite a bit in rural environments. Whenever we feel like there's a site that we don't understand, or a place or a context that we don't understand, rather than running away from it, we tend to run to it. I don't know what that says about us, but it's intuitively the way that I think it's rooted in curiosity, and it's also rooted in a belief that there's no situation or problem that we can't get a grip on. So this is Volland, Kansas, population 1. And it was a railroad town founded in the early 1900s. This is the general store, which was the lifeblood of Wabunsee County for a long time, until just after World War II. It fits right into sort of a global history of transitions, immigration, race, class issues. On the left is a famous photograph of August Sander, of German farmers taking a night out on the town. The ill-fitting clothes are the sort of telltale sign that they may not be who they appear to be. On the right is it's actually a year earlier. That's the construction site of the Volland store. The owner of the building was also an amateur photographer and videographer. So there's a complete record of the social history of Volland, Kansas, from 1907 until 1965, 1970. Mirrors the decline of rural America almost to a T. Volland does. And we have on the right is our client, Patty Reese, who has a house nearby, and the building had been empty for 25 years. It looked like that. The first time I saw it, it looked like that on the left. And the interior designer that we worked with on the project is the man with the scarf. He's a really joyful character, but in every photograph I have of him in this project, he's not joyful. And he would call me after every site visit and just say, "What is this? Like, what is this?" And there's Patty on the right, just couldn't be happier. There was no program. It's maybe the only project we've ever done where there was no program until about 2 years into the project. She just wanted to save the building, and the plan was to tear the building down and sell the brick. It's the only brick building in the county. It's a county of quick stick-built houses or solid limestone houses, walls. So interesting for that fact alone. But it's essentially a community center, an unsanctioned community center. There are art exhibits, FAA board meetings, K-State's nearby, so K-State uses the facility quite a bit. We are architects. We're very concerned about details and joints, and we fabricated the structural infill for the building by Josh. It's a little bit. I think we started doing this because we couldn't find anybody to fabricate our work at a reasonable cost, and then it became sort of put up or shut up. And now it's really, it's really about refinement and the question of who deserves good design, what does good design mean. These are all the kinds of questions that we really sort of take to heart. So, in this context, in the middle, these are cowboys, and on the right are Indians. Those are Indian motorcycles. Patty had facilitated a series of 5 conversations about climate change in the middle of a place where you just don't say the words climate change. And she actually brought this diverse crowd of people together to talk about issues and talk about experiences that they were having. And it was really kind of a remarkable coming together of minds. So this is the sum total of Volland, and Patty now owns everything but the White House, which sounds impressive, but There's 8 structures, and I think she spent maybe $50,000 for all of it. But the question now is, what does she do with this? And so we've been working with her for a long time to program an arts and humanities residency program that slowly but surely takes all of the assets of the town and turns them into support structures. So this is a kit house that we have been working on with students of mine at K-State, Kansas State, where we've been teaching a design build studio, as if we weren't busy enough with practice and bringing on a new partner and increased insurance costs, et cetera. We also teach a design build studio where the students in 2 semesters and a month will design and build a complete structure. This group actually did not do that. It was kind of an unruly bunch. We got through demolition and we started to build back the exterior and brought in the infrastructure, and then the last student ran away. But before that, on a more positive note, this is 2 years prior, a group of 15 students programmed, designed, and built an outdoor education station in the Tallgrass Prairie, the most endangered ecosystem in North America. There's only 4% of it left. It's very subtle. Most people just sort of pass through it and don't notice it. It's all underground. But the students, they had a hand. We worked with a traditional limestone mason, a general contractor, local steel workers. So it's not a heroic approach to design build. And there'll probably be questions about how does that work in terms of insurance and liability, and I won't answer those questions. I will. But no, this is it's a YMCA camp. We've worked with Johnson County. We worked with a number of municipal clients, so there is a way to do it, I think, if there's a will. Pretty amazing, just in terms of design, craft, impact, very simple. A very sort of carefully studied sunscreen for people to gather and learn about the prairie. Just the simple act of lifting people 18 inches or so above the prairie changes the perspective fundamentally. You can see this now in Google Earth. Okay, spanning economies. I'm going to move through this really quickly and then stop to take questions. Spanning economies is about, if you haven't gathered yet, just when we start moving in one direction, there's always one partner who turns the opposite direction and starts tugging the other way. So I think we'd been doing some high-end residential work and not feeling guilty about it, actually enjoying it immensely, but thinking that just when you start to get comfortable, it's time to go the other way. So we've been quite involved in different experiments into affordable housing in 6 or 7 different typologies that I could talk about. But this one was this was an experiment in just market rate housing in kind of midtown Kansas City. A great developer out of Chicago has come along and is really transforming this part of the city. This was built for $135 a square foot. 82 units, and then parking down below and retail. It was our first experiment in modular construction. So the units are fabricated in York, Nebraska, trucked into Kansas City, and then hoisted into place. It shaved 6 weeks off the construction schedule. At the end of the day, $135 a square foot is a pretty good number for market rate housing. Actually, it's a great number for market rate housing. The only real problem that we had, when they would bring these things maybe 15 at a time, and it would really logjam traffic in this part of the city, and people in Kansas City don't like it when their streets are blocked. So we heard about it. Just really simple floor plans. The width is driven by an efficient 58-foot parking bay made of concrete, or covered by concrete. And really it was just, within the limitations of modular construction, where can you have fun? And basically this is it. We had fun by shifting the boxes back and forth and playing with color or tone, really. We also, we fabricated, We usually find a way to fabricate some component on a project. In this case, early on, we negotiate a budget for a fabricated item. In this case, the stair in the retail space, or actually in the shared amenity space for the building. And this is typical. This is Main Street, USA. This is Restart Housing. This was the last HUD 811 grant in the state of Missouri. $125 a square foot. HUD regulated, which meant everybody. There's a funny story about everyone needs to be earning a more than a living wage, a certified wage. There's a funny story about the HUD inspector who was on site one day and saw somebody, emptying the porta potty, and went running over and said, "I need you to prove to me that you're earning the federal standard rate for a porta potty emptier." And they did. It's all. Everything was by the book. But it's interesting that, this is the kind of challenge we find ourselves running into. You only have $125 a foot, and you have this incredible pile of regulations. So we're just like, that's where we want to be. But so this is housing. This is service-supported housing for young adults aging out of foster care who have mental health diagnoses. This is the largest source of the homeless population in the United States. And it's a totally fixable, solvable problem. We collectively don't have the political will to do it. So this was an example of 16 apartments. So feel it would be great if it were 160 or 1,600, but it is what we had. And as we're moving again, we hold ourselves accountable to what we consider to be the highest standards in terms of good design. The light from two sides, good airflow, these great spaces on the inside where this community can be formed around these courtyards, and you see snow coming in. You're protected, but you see rain and snow coming in. We collected our own data, just trying to understand what are the data points that tell us whether or not we've been doing a good job. One of the indicators for a project like this is employment. And in a typical 811 project, 20% employment of the residents is the standard. And in this building, it's 80%. Another data point is the number of service calls to the police department. There's typically two a month, and ours has had 2 since it opened 3 years ago. And there's a real sense of pride. On the interiors, Josh and I are always debating what images do we show, and we weren't really happy about the interiors, but they are what they are. $125 a square foot. You've got to pick your battles, and so no embarrassment, a little bit of embarrassment. Contextually, right across this was a parking lot, a disused parking lot, and across the street was a 4-story storage unit, urban, midtown storage unit. So, not wanting to deny its presence, we thought we'd sort of grab a hold of its color scheme and duplicate it in maybe a more elegant way. This is a duplex built by K-State students 2 years ago. Built for $190 a square foot, which doesn't sound affordable. But the rent, in exchange for the students working, the developer agreed to interview. You couldn't qualify if you made more than 80% of average median income for this zip code. And then once they interviewed people and they sort of identified the qualified people, they then had them prove their income and only charged them 30% of their income for rent. So it is, in fact, strictly defined affordable housing. And the developer crowd will always say, well, wait a minute, how does that work? And the reality is this developer is thinking holistically. They have a lot of holdings in this neighborhood. They were developing some high-end products, and they were worried about creating a one-dimensional neighborhood, and decided that they would take matters into their own hands and try to solve the problem, or at least not create a bigger problem. So I'll stop there. This is all about hospitality.